Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's a certain expectation of precision.
Right.
It feels like engineering. If you break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and the doctor puts that film up against the light box.
Mm-hmm.
You see the bone, you see the jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is. That is the break.
Yeah, it is totally binary. Like,
Yeah.
broken or not broken, you look at it and you know right away.
Yeah, it is clean. And honestly, it is comforting. We like things to be visible.
We
We like things to be neatly categorized. But then you step into the world of measuring spiritual health, whether that is your own personal spiritual health or the health of an entire congregation, and suddenly that x-ray machine is totally broken.
Oh, entirely. It just does not work the same way.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, quite frankly, murky. So welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're bringing you a deep dive into two comprehensive, theologically rigorous commentaries focusing on a very specific passage of Scripture. We are looking at Colossians chapter 1, verses 3 through 6.
Yes, and it is such a fascinating text.
It really is. For you listening right now, our goal today is to ask a rather blunt question. How do we actually gauge spiritual vitality? Because if you look around today, the modern church often obsesses over sociological data.
Yeah, the spreadsheets and the charts.
Right. They look at marketing strategies, attendance numbers, giving units, or even subjective mystical experiences to figure out if a congregation is healthy.
Which makes sense from a purely human perspective, I mean. We crave those measurable data points because they give us a sense of control.
Mm-hmm.
But the Apostle Paul provides a completely different metric in a first-century letter. We are looking at an ancient text written by a man chained to a Roman guard, diagnosing the health of a church without a single one of the modern metrics we rely on today.
That is wild to think about.
It is. I will be approaching this analysis through the lens of Reformed systematic theology, breaking down the synthesis of these commentaries. Our sources reveal a concept they refer to as a heavenly root of earthly fruit.
A heavenly root of earthly fruit. I like that.
Right. They make a compelling case that Paul is establishing a metric based entirely on objective truth. And that truth then inevitably produces visible, undeniable results in the lives of believers.
Okay, let's unpack this. I am incredibly curious about how these ancient metrics apply to you and me right now. If we are setting aside the spreadsheets and the attendance numbers, what does genuine spiritual fruit look like?
That is the main question.
And practically speaking, where does it come from? To answer those questions, we have to set the stage. We need to go back to ancient Asia Minor.
Let us do it.
So, looking at the historical context here, Paul is writing this letter around AD 60 to 62. He is sitting in a Roman prison, completely restricted in his movements.
Yeah, he is not traveling at this point.
Oh, right. And he is writing to the Christians in Colossae. This city is located in the Lycus Valley of Phrygia, which is in modern-day Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Geographically, it's sat right on a major trade highway. But historically speaking, by the time Paul is writing, Colossae had been totally eclipsed by its neighboring cities, Laodicea and Hierapolis. Colossae was shrinking in influence.
It was sort of past its prime.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, spot on. And here is a fascinating detail. Paul did not even plant this church.
He did not.
A man named Epaphras did. The sources point out that this detail is crucial because it demonstrates how the gospel expands without the direct physical presence of an apostle.
And that geographical and historical reality is vital for understanding the whole letter.
How so?
Well, Colossae was a massive melting pot. It was a place where very different, often conflicting ideologies collided on a daily basis. You had indigenous Phrygian folk religion, which was very focused on the natural world and spiritual forces. You had Greek philosophy filtering through the trade routes. And you had a strict Jewish legalism, all coexisting in one localized area.
Wow, so a lot of competing voices.
Tons of them. And this specific environment gave rise to what scholars call the Colossian heresy.
The Colossian heresy.
Yeah. The commentaries describe it as a proto-Gnostic syncretism. False teachers were coming into the church and pushing things like angel worship, harsh asceticism, and a demand for a higher secret knowledge that supposedly went beyond the basic, simple gospel message.
Okay, wait, hold on.
Sure.
Let's make sure we are completely clear on the terminology here. When the commentaries say proto-Gnostic syncretism, meaning they were just blending all these different religions together like a theological buffet.
That is a great way to put it.
Taking a little bit of Jesus, a little bit of Greek philosophy, a little bit of angel worship, and creating a new hybrid religion.
Precisely. Syncretism is the blending of different, often contradictory beliefs. And the proto-Gnostic part refers to this early obsession with secret elite knowledge. The Greek word gnosis means knowledge.
Right, gnosis.
So these false teachers claim to possess an elevated hidden insight that ordinary Christians did not have. It is a very elitist mindset. It preys on the natural human desire to be part of an exclusive club, to be on the inside.
It makes me think of Colossae, like a bypassed, overlooked Rust Belt town.
Oh, that is a good comparison.
A place the world has sort of moved on from. You drive through and see closed factories and empty main streets. The fact that the cosmic rescue mission of Christ took root there, without even an apostle present, proves that the gospel relies entirely on divine sovereignty.
Yes.
It does not rely on worldly prestige or metropolitan influence. It bypassed the massive cultural hubs to take root in this very ordinary, struggling place.
Absolutely.
But it also makes sense why these believers might be vulnerable to someone promising them secret elite knowledge. They probably felt very insignificant.
That psychological vulnerability is key, and that leads directly into Paul's literary strategy. In ancient rhetoric, the opening section of a formal letter is called the exordium.
The exordium.
Right. Verses 3 through 6 act as this exordium, which is an introductory thanksgiving. But the sources are clear. This is not polite filler.
It is not just small talk.
No. It is not Paul just making small talk before he gets to the real point. It is a pastoral trap for the heretic.
It's a trap.
Yes. By affirming right out of the gate that the Colossians already possess everything necessary for godliness through the simple gospel they first heard, Paul nullifies the need for any supplementary visions or secret knowledge.
Oh, wow. So he is shutting them down immediately.
He shuts down the false teachers before he even addresses their specific arguments later in the letter. He essentially says, you already have the fullness of truth. You do not need to look elsewhere.
So if Paul is writing this letter to counter a very specific heresy that is threatening the Colossians, why does he start by talking to God instead of addressing the church directly?
That is the grammatical question we need to ask.
Right, because if I see a friend walking toward a cliff, I yell at my friend. I do not start praising someone else. Let's look at the grammar of gratitude in verse 3. The primary Greek verb governing the passage is eucharistumen, which means we give thanks. And it is directed entirely to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Paul also uses a causal participle, accusantes, meaning having heard. Translate the grammar into the actual implication here. Paul thanks God because he heard of their spiritual state. He intentionally looks right past the Colossians and directs his gratitude upward.
And as Protestants who adhere to the Westminster Confession, we have to unpack the doctrinal weight of this grammatical choice.
Yes, let's do that.
Paul thanks God, not the Colossians, because God is the sole author of their salvation. This is the bedrock of Reformed systematic theology.
Okay.
The commentaries present a rigorous defense of monergism against synergism.
So break that down for us.
Sure. Monergism teaches that salvation is a one-way rescue mission, authored and executed by God alone. Mono meaning one, ergon meaning work.
One worker.
One worker. Got it. Synergism argues that salvation requires cooperation between God and human free will. Two workers. The commentaries argue forcefully from this text that Paul's thanksgiving proves salvation is entirely monergistic.
This makes me think of a sports analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a coach wins a championship game, you thank the players for executing the plays. You congratulate the quarterback for the perfect throw or the defense for holding the line.
Right. You praise the people who did the work.
Exactly. Or, yeah, precisely. By thanking God for the Colossians' faith, what is Paul saying about human free will and our natural abilities? If I'm a listener sitting in my car right now trying to muster up enough spiritual energy to get through the week, what does this say about my own efforts?
Yeah.
It seems like Paul is completely removing human effort from the equation of salvation.
He is absolutely removing it. He is recognizing that by nature, we possess zero capacity to produce genuine spiritual fruit. This goes back to the doctrine of total depravity. We are not just spiritually sick, we are spiritually dead. The thanksgiving in verse 3 is a massive theological statement. If the Colossians had produced this faith on their own, or even if they had met God halfway, Paul would have congratulated them.
He would have said, "Good job, guys."
Right. He would have praised their wise choice. But because he knows that dead hearts cannot generate saving faith, he directs his praise entirely upward.
That makes a lot of sense.
The source material actually takes aim at Arminianism here, noting that Arminianism places the decisive factor of salvation in the human will. The authors argue that if the human will makes the final decision, then humanity deserves at least a portion of the thanks.
Which Paul does not give them.
No, he does not. The sources also present a critique of the Roman Catholic doctrine of infused righteousness, claiming that this text proves God alone deserves the credit for any spiritual life. If we connect this to the broader theological landscape, specifically the Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 7, this passage beautifully describes the fruit of the new covenant. God is the one who initiates, sustains, and guarantees the spiritual life of the believer.
Okay, I am following the logic. If we are spiritually bankrupt and cannot generate this on our own, God has to do it. But if God receives all the credit, what specific evidence proves he is actually at work in this congregation? How do we know it isn't just an invisible theoretical transaction?
We have to look for the fruit.
Right. We need to look at the visible evidence, faith and love, which we find in verse 4. Paul points to these twin graces. First, he mentions faith in Christ Jesus, translated from the Greek word paisetas.
What is fascinating here is that the object of this faith is everything. The sources explain that biblical faith is not a subjective leap in the dark.
It is not just hoping for the best.
No, it is not wishing for the best or trying to maintain a positive mental attitude. It is a settled persuasion resting entirely on the person and work of Christ. As those who hold to the Westminster Confession, we look at chapter 11 on justification. Faith is the sole instrumental cause of justification. It is the empty hand that receives Christ's righteousness.
The empty hand. I love that image.
But notice the direction. It is never directed inwardly. You do not place faith in your own faith. You direct it exclusively at Christ. The false teachers in Colossae wanted the believers to place their faith in angelic visions, in ascetic practices, in their own dietary restrictions.
They wanted them looking at themselves.
Yes, and Paul centers it all entirely on Christ.
And the second grace is love for all the saints, the Greek word agape. The text shows that saving faith is never alone. It always produces sacrificial, covenantal love for the whole body of believers.
It has to.
Right. Not just the people you get along with, not just the people who share your socioeconomic background or your political views. It connects directly to sanctification, which is covered in Westminster Confession, chapter 13. You do not just love the people who look like you or agree with your hobbies. You love everyone united to Christ.
It is compelling how the commentaries apply this standard to modern culture. The source material explicitly states that this inclusive, spirit-generated love shatters societal hierarchies.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the authors actually use this biblical standard as a direct critique of modern secular movements. Specifically, the text calls out critical race theory and its Marxist roots.
Interesting.
The argument presented in the commentary is that these modern ideologies attempt to segment people by fleshly categories, race, class, worldly power dynamics, creating inherent division and hostility.
So they are saying it splits people up.
Yes, the sources argue that Paul's definition of love for all the saints leaves no room for division based on earthly metrics. When you are united to Christ, the ground is level at the foot of the cross.
The ground is level.
You view fellow believers through the lens of their union with Christ, not through the lens of their societal status. Now that is the argument the authors are making based on their reading of the text.
Yeah, that is a very clear line they are drawing from the first century directly into today's cultural debates. I think of faith and love as two sides of the same coin. Faith is the empty hand looking upward to receive everything from Christ.
Right.
It recognizes our total poverty. While love is the open hand reaching outward to give to the brethren, you cannot have one without the other. They are organically linked.
Completely.
But this brings up a huge practical issue. I get the theory. Look up to Christ, reach out to people. But in practice, you know as well as I do, people are exhausting.
Oh, absolutely.
Communities are messy. People let you down. If human willpower runs out very quickly when it comes to loving difficult people, what is the actual engine keeping this going in a first-century church that is facing intense pressure from false teachers?
That is the crucial question. What sustains this outward action when circumstances get difficult? That brings us to the engine of virtue, found in verse 5a.
Verse 5a.
The grammar here gives us the mechanism. The Greek preposition dia, meaning because of, shows that the hope laid up in heaven is the actual ground or engine that produces present faith and love.
Wait, read that carefully.
Yes, Paul says they have faith and love because of the hope. Biblical hope is not a fragile wish. We use the word hope today to mean sanctified guesswork.
Like, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow.
Right, or I hope my team wins. That is not biblical hope. Biblical hope is absolute, concrete certainty regarding a future inheritance.
The phrase Paul uses is laid up in heaven. Let's talk about that imagery.
The phrase comes from the Greek participle apokimenon. In Greco-Roman usage, this specific term described a monarch's private treasury.
Like an emperor's vault.
Well, yes, think of an emperor's vault, heavily guarded, where the wealth of the empire is stored securely. It was also used to describe an athlete's prize locked away safely until the end of the games, safe from thieves or decay.
Safe from anything that could ruin it.
It is completely untouchable by worldly circumstances. Your bank account can collapse, your reputation can be ruined by gossip, your physical health can deteriorate. But this treasury in heaven remains completely intact.
Wow.
And here, the commentaries introduce a sharp critique of modern theological trends. The authors present a strong argument against the prosperity gospel.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
They note that the text exposes earthly health and wealth as false refuges. The prosperity gospel anchors people to decaying things. It tells them to seek their best life now, to build their treasury on earth.
Which is the exact opposite of what Paul is saying.
Yes, Paul commands believers to look to a sinless, eternal inheritance that cannot be touched by inflation, disease, or theft. Additionally, the source material introduces a dispensational theological lens.
A dispensational lens, okay.
The author connects this specific hope laid up in heaven to a pre-tribulational rapture. The text claims this heavenly hope is a unique promise given exclusively to the church, which they argue is distinct from the earthly geopolitical promises made to ethnic Israel.
So they're making a sharp distinction there.
Right. They use this verse to distinguish between heavenly and earthly destinies. We are just looking at how the authors apply this specific text to broader theological systems.
I have to pause and push back here on behalf of the listener because I know what someone listening to this might be thinking. Doesn't focusing entirely on a heavenly future make a person disconnected or totally useless for practical issues on Earth right now?
That is a fair question.
We have all heard the old cliche, they are so heavenly minded that they are of no earthly good.
We hear it all the time.
Right. If your entire focus is locked away in a vault in the sky, how do you handle your actual life? How do you show up for your job? How do you handle conflicts in your family? How do you engage with your local community? It sounds like escapism.
It's a very common critique, and it sounds logical on the surface, but the text resolves this brilliantly by showing us the psychological mechanics of true hope.
Okay, lay it out.
Heavenly security does not lead to escapism. It actually liberates the believer to engage the world fearlessly. Think about how human nature works.
Okay.
If your ultimate treasure is here on earth, your career, your house, your social standing, you are going to be crippled by earthly anxieties. You will constantly be in a state of self-preservation.
Because you were terrified of losing it.
Right. You will fiercely guard your resources. You will lash out at anyone who threatens your reputation. Because if you lose those things, you lose your identity.
That makes total sense.
But if your actual prize is safe in a heavenly vault, you are completely freed from that anxiety. You no longer have to fiercely guard your resources. This creates the exact psychological conditions necessary for radical, sacrificial love today.
Wow.
You can afford to be extraordinarily generous with your money. You can afford to be patient with difficult people. You can afford to forgive those who wrong you because you have absolutely nothing to lose in the grand scheme of things.
Because your real wealth is secure.
Yes. Therefore, being intensely heavenly minded is the only way to be of any real earthly good.
That is incredible. It flips the cliche completely upside down. So if this hope is locked away in a secure, untouchable heavenly vault, how does a person living in the 1st century in Colossae or someone listening to us right now in the 21st century actually gain access to it?
You need a way in.
Right. I do not have a ladder to heaven. How do I get the key? The answer is the delivery system, which Paul calls the word of truth. In verse 5b, he says, this hope is accessed through hearing the word of the truth of the gospel.
This point is absolutely central. Christianity is a revealed religion. It is based entirely on objective, external truth coming to us from the outside.
Outside of ourselves.
Yes, it is not about internal mystical discovery. The false teachers were telling the Colossians to look inward, to find secret visions, to meditate their way up to God.
And Paul says no.
Paul says absolutely not. The Colossians did not meditate their way into this hope. They heard a specific historical message. The word for gospel here is euangelion.
Let's break down that word, because we use the word gospel so casually today that it has almost lost its edge.
It really has. In the secular Roman world of the 1st century, euangelion was an imperial announcement. It was a royal decree.
Like a proclamation from the emperor.
Exactly. If Caesar won a massive military victory against barbarians on the frontier, or if the emperor had a son who would be the new heir to the throne, imperial heralds would run through the streets of the cities proclaiming the evangelion, the good news.
Okay, so it was a political, public announcement.
Yes. And Paul takes that secular, politically charged word and uses it subversively.
Mm-hmm.
He is saying to the Colossians, this is the royal decree of King Jesus, the true ruler of the world. It is an announcement of a victory that has already happened at the cross and the empty tomb.
Let me offer an analogy for this because I think it captures the difference between Christianity and every other religious system.
Let's hear it.
Think of the gospel as a news bulletin rather than an instruction manual.
Oh, a news bulletin. Okay.
Imagine you are a prisoner of war in a camp and you are starving and the conditions are horrific. An instruction manual would be someone slipping a piece of paper under your door that says, well, here are 10 steps to fight the guards, dig a tunnel, and free yourself.
Right, which sounds impossible if you were starving.
It puts the entire burden of salvation on you. It requires you to perform. A news bulletin, on the other hand, is someone throwing open the doors of the camp and announcing, the war is over, the Allied forces have won, you are free.
Yes.
A news bulletin announces a reality that changes your entire situation instantly without you lifting a finger.
That news bulletin idea is the very distinction we need to make here. Because if someone hands you a manual, you are trapped in a system of performance.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to the theological distinction between law and gospel.
Right, law and gospel.
The commentaries present a stunning framework here.
Mm.
The first use of the law exposes our total depravity. The moral demands of God's law show us that we are completely incapable of producing perfect faith or love on our own.
The manual shows us we can't do it.
Right. The law demands a perfect, flawless record that we simply do not have. It acts as a mirror showing us our dirt. The gospel, however, the evangelion, is the news bulletin announcing Christ's remedy. It announces that Christ has met all the demands of the law on our behalf.
Wow.
Then the commentaries point us to the third use of the law, known as the usus didacticus, which is beautifully outlined in Westminster Confession, chapter 19.
Okay, so how does that work for the believer?
For the justified believer, the moral law no longer acts as a condemning judge. Instead, it becomes a guide for our grateful obedience. We do not bear fruit in order to earn our salvation. We bear fruit because we are already saved.
So the law becomes a helpful guide for the new life we have received, not a condition for earning it.
Spot on. Furthermore, the sources break down how Christ's threefold office is functioning right here in this text.
Prophet, priest, and king.
Yes. As prophet, Christ speaks this word of truth through the preaching of the gospel. As priest, he has entered the heavenly sanctuary, offering his own blood to secure that untouchable hope for us.
And as king.
And as king, he rules and expands his kingdom through the ongoing proclamation of this royal decree. Everything in this passage revolves entirely around the finished historical work of Jesus Christ.
So when this objective royal decree, this news bulletin, is proclaimed in a dusty town like Colossae, what happens? Does it stay localized? Does it just affect a few people and fade away? Or does it spread?
We see the answer in verse 6.
Yeah, look at verse 6. Paul writes that the gospel is in all the world and bearing fruit in you. He links the global and the local. This completely shatters the elitist, localized claims of the false teachers.
He wanted to keep it small.
They wanted to keep knowledge exclusive. They wanted it to be a regional mystery cult for the enlightened few. Paul says, no, this is a global phenomenon. It is sweeping across the known world, and it is doing the exact same thing in you.
The Greek participles Paul uses here are vital for understanding the mechanics of how the word operates. Paul uses karpophorumenon, meaning bearing fruit, and oxenomenon, meaning increasing.
Okay, karpophorumenon and oxenomenon, that is a mouthful.
I know that sounds like heavy academic grammar, but stick with the implication here. Both are present, middle passive participles. What that indicates is a continuous organic action that has inherent energy.
Inherent energy.
The gospel itself possesses inherent efficacy to regenerate dead hearts.
Mm-hmm.
It is a living, active force. It is not just dead information on a page.
Okay, so it does the work itself.
Yes. And the commentaries present a strong argument against modern pragmatic church growth strategies based on these participles.
Really?
The authors heavily critique seeker-sensitive church movements. The text argues that the gospel requires no worldly enhancements. It does not need sociological data, demographic targeting, smoke machines, or slip marketing strategies to be effective.
Because the word has its own energy.
Right. The gospel does the heavy lifting. The same message that converts a hostile sinner is the identical message that sanctifies the mature saint. You never graduate from the gospel into something more complex.
I am thinking about a seed being planted in the ground. You don't have to yell at a seed to grow.
You really don't.
You don't have to market a seed. You just put it in the soil, and the DNA inside the seed does the work. It bursts open and bears fruit. If the gospel acts organically like a seed bearing fruit, how should that alter the way a local church evaluates its own success today?
Well, it shifts the focus entirely.
If you are a pastor or a church member listening to this, and we are not supposed to use corporate marketing metrics, what is the actual standard?
Based purely on the text of Colossae, success is not measured by numerical size. It is not measured by the size of the annual budget, or cultural visibility, or how many followers the pastor has on social media.
Those are just human metrics.
Those are entirely worldly metrics. True success, biblical success, is measured by the presence of Christ-centered faith, broad-hearted covenantal love, and a hope that is firmly rooted in the finished work of the gospel.
So even a tiny church could be massively successful.
Exactly. If a church is small, if it meets in a basement, if it is completely overlooked by the culture, much like ancient Colossae, yet it possesses these three specific graces, it is a profoundly healthy and successful congregation in the eyes of God.
Let's bring all of this together because we have mapped out a massive causal chain today. Think about how these pieces interlock.
It is quite a chain.
The objective word of truth, that news bulletin of the gospel, delivers a heavenly hope. That secure, untouchable hope acts as an engine in human psychology, liberating us from fear and producing visible faith in Christ and sacrificial love for the saints.
And all of this,
From beginning to end, is driven by the monergistic grace of God. It is an unbroken chain stretching from the vault of heaven down to the dusty streets of our daily lives.
it is a cohesive framework that leaves absolutely no room for human boasting and every reason for immense, overwhelming gratitude.
Here is a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your week. If the exact same gospel that reached ancient Phrygia is currently bearing fruit across the globe today, look at your own life. Are you assessing your spiritual health by your level of exhaustion? Are you measuring yourself by your busy religious activities, trying to earn God's favor? Or are you looking for the quiet, undeniable presence of faith, love, and a hope anchored far above the anxieties of this world?
That is the real test.
When you look at the x-ray of your own heart, are you trying to read the smudges of human effort, or are you looking for the clear, bright lines of a hope laid up in heaven? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep analyzing your sources, keep asking the hard questions, and we will catch you next time.